The gavel crashes down like thunder against the wooden bench, its echo reverberating through the cold, sterile courtroom. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of everyone present. You're just another black boy with no future. Judge Gerald Thornton's voice drips with venom as his eyes bore into the 17-year-old standing before him. The words hang in the air like poison, settling into the silence that follows. Marcus Chambers stands tall, 17 years old, shoulders squared despite the crushing weight of every judgmental stare piercing his back. His dark suit, borrowed from his uncle for this occasion, fits him well. His hands remain steady at his sides. The judge leans forward in his elevated chair, his black robes pooling around him like the wings of some malevolent creature. The nameplate on his bench gleams. Honorable Gerald Thornton. I know you're kind, the judge continues, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper that somehow carries through the entire courtroom. Just another statistic waiting to happen. That's all you'll ever be. His finger jabs the air between them, punctuating each word with barely concealed contempt. No discipline, no guidance, no father figure in your life. That's the problem with you people. Marcus's jaw tightens, but his expression remains composed. Years of navigating spaces that weren't designed for people who looked like him have taught him the value of measured responses. Judge Thornton's thin lips curl into a smile that contains no warmth. Where is your father anyway? Let me guess. Absent? In prison? Does he even know you exist? Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The silence stretches for a moment that feels like an eternity. Every person in that courtroom, the bailiff by the door, the court reporter with her fingers frozen above her keyboard, the few observers scattered across the wooden benches, holds their breath. Then Marcus speaks. His voice is calm, steady, respectful, despite everything. May I call him, Your Honor? Judge Thornton's eyebrows shoot up in surprise before settling into an amused expression. He waves his hand dismissively, a cruel smile playing at his lips. By all means, young man, if he even answers. I'm sure he has better things to do than show up for his son. Marcus reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone. The courtroom watches in stunned silence as he unlocks it and scrolls to a contact. His thumb hovers over the call button for just a moment before pressing down. The phone rings. Once. Twice. Then a deep, authoritative voice answers. Marcus? What's happening? Dad, Marcus says, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. I'm in Courtroom 7C with Judge Thornton. He says you failed to raise me right. He's wondering where you are. Marcus's voice remains steady, controlled. Could you come to Courtroom 7C now? The judge would like to meet you. On the other end of the line, there's a brief pause. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Put the phone on speaker and don't hang up. Marcus complies, placing the phone face up on the defense table. The voice that emerges is calm, but carries the unmistakable weight of authority. Judge Thornton, this is Michael Chambers. I understand you have some concerns about how I've raised my son. I look forward to discussing them with you in person. Judge Thornton's face has turned an interesting shade of gray. His mouth opens and closes, but no words come out. I assume you're still there, Judge? The voice continues. Please keep my son in that courtroom. I'm leaving the Justice Department now. The court reporter's hands have stopped, moving entirely. The bailiff takes an involuntary step backward. Even the ancient clock on the wall seems to hesitate in its ticking. Because everyone in that courtroom, everyone except perhaps Marcus himself, has just realized exactly who is on the other end of that phone call. Michael Chambers, the United States Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer of the entire United States of America, the man who oversees the FBI, the DEA, and every federal prosecutor in the nation. Judge Thornton's face cycles through a remarkable range of emotions in seconds: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, raw, undisguised terror. His hands grip the edge of his bench so tightly his knuckles turn white. The confidence that had dripped from his every word moments ago has evaporated entirely. I'll also be bringing my staff to review some concerning patterns in your courtroom that have recently come to my attention, the Attorney General's voice continues. Oh, through the phone. I trust you'll make yourself available. The words hang in the air like a sentence already delivered. And in a way they are. Who exactly is about to face judgment? And how did a high school student science project lead to this pivotal confrontation that would expose corruption reaching to the highest levels of power? The answer begins earlier that morning when Marcus Chambers walked through those courthouse doors carrying nothing but his research and walked into a conspiracy that powerful people would do anything to keep hidden. Earlier that day, Marcus Chambers walked up the courthouse steps carrying his most prized possession, an air quality monitoring system he'd spent 8 months building. The device represented countless hours of research and programming in his family's garage. Late nights after homework was finished, weekends when his friends were out having fun, every spare moment devoted to this single purpose. Today was supposed to be his triumph. The Environmental Committee had invited him to present his findings about air pollution disparities. Dr. Patricia Williams, a renowned environmental scientist, had personally championed his work after seeing his preliminary data at a school science fair. She'd called it exactly the kind of community-driven research that changes policy. Marcus had barely slept the night before, running through his presentation in his head, making sure every data point was memorized. His mother had ironed his best shirt. His father had left an encouraging voicemail before dawn. "Proud of you, son. Show them what you've got." "What's that thing?" Officer Dennis Blake stepped forward, eyes narrowing at Marcus's device. The security guard's suspicious gaze traveled from the equipment to Marcus's face and back again, as if trying to match both to some mental image of threat. "It's an air quality monitor, sir. I'm presenting to the Environmental Committee today." He reached toward his backpack to retrieve his papers. "Hands where I can see them." Blake's voice cracked through the lobby like a whip, his hand moving to his holster. Every head in the lobby turned to watch. A woman gasped. A lawyer dropped his briefcase. Marcus froze. He'd been through this before. The sudden escalation, the aggressive suspicion, the feeling of being treated as a threat simply for existing in a certain space. "Sir, I'm just trying to show you my authorization papers." "Back up. Put the device on the table." Slowly. Marcus complied, watching Blake grab his monitor carelessly. "This looks suspicious to me. Could be some kind of explosive." "It's a science project. The sensors measure particulate matter." "We got a suspicious device here," Blake called into his radio. "Need backup at the main entrance. Possible threat." 2 more guards surrounded Marcus. And through it all, he noticed something else. A white teenager walked through the adjacent checkpoint carrying a science fair display board with visible wires and batteries. The guards waved him through with a friendly smile. "Have a good day, son," one said cheerfully. Marcus watched this while standing with his hands raised, surrounded by guards treating him like a terrorist. The contrast was so stark it would have been almost funny if it weren't so deeply painful. From across the lobby, Judge Gerald Thornton stood observing with his arms crossed, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Why aren't you in school, boy?" The judge approached the security cluster, his black robes trailing behind him. "I have an excused absence, sir. I'm presenting to the Environmental Committee." "We'll see about that." Thornton nodded to the guards. "Bring him to my courtroom first." And so Marcus, honor student, science prodigy, son of the Attorney General, was escorted away like a criminal. As they walked, Marcus caught fragments of the judge's conversation. "These people always have excuses. He'll know his place after today." Marcus straightened his shoulders. This wasn't about his project anymore. Something bigger was happening here. Judge Thornton's courtroom sat empty, bathed in pale morning light filtering through tall windows. The American flag hung in the corner. The state seal looked down from above the bench. Everything about the room was designed to intimidate. Marcus stood alone before the judicial bench, his disassembled projects scattered across a table like evidence of some crime. "Explain what this device does." The judge scrolled through his phone without looking up, his disinterest obvious and deliberate. "It measures particulate matter concentrations, Your Honor, specifically PM2.5 and PM10 particles. I've documented levels 3 to 4 times higher in low-income neighborhoods, correlating with significantly higher respiratory illness rates." Thornton tossed Marcus's papers aside without reading them. "Why bring this to my courthouse?" "The Environmental Committee meets here monthly. I was invited to present by Dr. Williams." The judge stood suddenly, his robes swirling. "Let me be clear. I've sat on this bench for 22 years. I've seen every excuse, every story someone like you could come up with. I understand, but no interruptions." His hand slammed the table. Components scattered. A sensor crashed to the floor with a sickening crack. "Your Honor, that's irreplaceable research equipment." "Research?" Thornton laughed harshly. "Where did you really get these parts? Who actually built this? Because I don't believe someone like you is capable of this kind of work." The words hit like physical blows. "Someone like you." "I designed and built everything myself with grant money from the Virginia Science Foundation." The judge picked up a circuit board with theatrical suspicion. "This could interfere with courthouse systems. We'll hold it for security inspection." "For how long?" "Days, maybe weeks." Thornton smiled coldly. "And your presentation materials are also being held." "May I have a receipt for my property?" "Getting legal advice, are we?" The judge leaned close. "Let me be clear. This isn't your science fair. Run along to your meeting. And Mr. Chambers, know your place." Marcus walked out with his head high. Behind him, Thornton reached for his phone. Dr. Patricia Williams found Marcus in the hallway. "Why aren't you setting up? We start in 12 minutes. "Judge Thornton confiscated my project, called it a security threat." Her expression shifted from confusion to outrage. "That's absurd. You're our keynote presenter. I've spent months telling the committee about your research." They returned to Thornton's courtroom together. The judge barely acknowledged Dr. Williams' protests about Marcus being their invited presenter. This young man brought unauthorized equipment into a federal building. Proper investigation is required. I personally vetted his project. This is legitimate research that could help thousands of people. Did you run background checks on him? Thornton's voice sharpened. Do you know where he's from? Who his family is? Dr. Williams stood her ground. He's one of the most promising young scientists I've encountered in my entire career. That doesn't answer my question. The judge turned to Marcus. Where exactly are you from? Atlanta, sir. My family moved here 4 years ago. Thornton's tone suggested he didn't believe a word. Your project stays confiscated. Dr. Williams argued that the presentation required the equipment, but Thornton wouldn't budge. Then perhaps he should have thought of that before bringing suspicious devices here. The conference room held 12 committee, Members around a large table. Environmental scientists, policy experts, community advocates, all waiting to hear from the young researcher they'd been promised. Marcus entered empty-handed. "Judge Thornton has confiscated my project and materials," he explained, keeping his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "I'll present from memory." Whispers spread through the room. Marcus saw pity on some faces, judgment on others. A woman in the back row shook her head and wrote something in her notebook. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph. Instead, it was becoming his moment of greatest challenge. He took a deep breath and began. "My project measures particulate matter concentrations in different neighborhoods across our city. Over 8 months, I documented levels 3 times higher in minority communities than in affluent areas." Without visual aids, he sketched diagrams on borrowed paper, explaining methodology and statistical controls. His voice grew stronger with each sentence, fed by a rising determination. They could take his equipment, but they couldn't take the knowledge in his head. The data shows environmental laws aren't enforced equally based on neighborhood demographics. The same violations that get immediate cleanup in wealthy areas are ignored for years, sometimes decades, in poor communities, and the health consequences are devastating. He drew connections between pollution spikes and emergency room visits, between ignored complaints and rising asthma rates. The committee members leaned forward, captivated, despite the absence of polished presentations. When he finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Committee Chair Dr. Raymond Foster began to applaud. Others followed, the sound building until it filled the conference room. "Remarkable work," Dr. Foster said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Especially under these circumstances. Would you present at the state conference next month?" Marcus nodded gratefully. "I'd be honored." Later, in a quiet hallway, the adrenaline crash hit hard. His hands shook as he dialed his father. Voicemail. "Dad, Judge Thornton confiscated my project. I managed okay with the presentation. Call when you can." A text arrived from his Uncle James, a civil rights attorney. "Document everything, names, times, what was said. I'm making calls." Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the courthouse before dawn, the sky still purple-gray and the air carrying the bite of late autumn. He carried a folder of documentation, receipts, grant authorization letters, photographs of his project at various stages of construction, character references from teachers and professors. His Uncle James had helped him compile everything overnight, walking him through the legal requirements for property claims. "Document everything," his uncle had said. "Every word, every interaction. This isn't just about getting your equipment back anymore." Judge Thornton's surprise was evident when he spotted Marcus waiting on the courthouse steps. His black BMW had barely come to a stop before the judge was stepping out, coffee in hand, expression darkening. "Mr. Chambers, persistent, aren't you?" "Good morning, Your Honor. I have documentation proving my project's legitimacy. It's scheduled for disposal this morning, and I'm requesting its immediate return." Thornton barely glanced at the folder Marcus extended toward him. "File it with the clerk. I have a busy docket today." "Sir, I received information that my property is scheduled for destruction this morning. Standard security protocol, I was told." That stopped Thornton in his tracks. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear that?" "It doesn't matter where. What matters is whether it's true. Even if it were, it's not your concern. Proper procedures are being followed. Due process requires notification before property destruction. I've documented this entire conversation, and if my property is destroyed without proper notification, I'll be forced to escalate this matter." Thornton stepped closer, his coffee breath hot in the cold morning air. "Are you threatening me, boy?" "No, sir. Exercising my rights as a citizen." You have no power here. I decide what happens in my courthouse. Your little science project, your documentation, none of it means anything to me. The courthouse belongs to the people, Your Honor. Thornton's face reddened with barely contained rage. Officer Blake, escort Mr. Chambers from the premises. He's causing a disturbance. A courthouse administrator interrupted before Blake could respond. Judge Thornton, there's an urgent call for you. They said it's extremely important. The judge glared at Marcus for another moment, something calculating in his eyes, then retreated inside. Marcus turned to Blake. I just want my project back. Blake looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the door where Thornton had disappeared. Kid, drop this. You don't know what you're dealing with. Is your pension worth destroying evidence of environmental discrimination? Blake's expression flickered. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. But he said nothing, just shook his head and walked back to his post. If you were in Marcus's position, standing alone against someone with all the power, fighting for something you'd built with your own hands, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. That evening, Marcus worked in his garage until midnight, rebuilding what he could from memory and spare parts. The smell of solder and electronics filled the space as he carefully reconstructed months of work from nothing but determination. His mother watched. From the doorway, her silhouette framed against the kitchen light. Marcus, it's almost 1 a.m. I know, Mom. I just need to get the basic sensors working again. Sometimes fighting isn't worth the cost. He looked up from his work, meeting her worried eyes. This is worth it, Mom. He connected wires carefully, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. When Thornton confiscated my project, he didn't just take a device. He tried to silence data showing his courthouse sites in one of the worst air quality zones in the city. What do you mean? I've been mapping the pollution patterns against city records. The highest concentrations, the ones making people sick, they cluster around certain neighborhoods. And the environmental complaints from those areas? Dismissed. Every single one. Often by the same judge. His mother was quiet for a long moment. You think there's a connection? I think someone powerful doesn't want my data made public. I think Judge Thornton is more worried about what I found than about any security threat. And I'm going to prove it. The next day, Marcus waited outside Thornton's courtroom for hours. An attorney, Victoria Chen from the Public Defender's Office, stopped to ask about his situation. After hearing his story, she made calls. Your project's already in disposal, but we might be able to intervene. They hurried to the basement where security blocked them. Through the door window, Marcus spotted his project, components scattered, partially damaged. That's months of research data in there. Judge Thornton emerged from the elevator. Ms. Chen, slumming with troublemakers today? This property is being improperly disposed of. Save your paperwork. That device was deemed a security risk by me personally. Based on what evidence? Victoria challenged. My courtroom. My decision. He gestured to security. Escort them out, mister. Chambers is banned from this building. Marcus stepped forward. I've been respectful. Why are you doing this? Thornton stared coldly. Because I can. Some people need to learn their place. As they were escorted out, Marcus saw through the closing door, Thornton picking up a hammer. He's going to destroy it himself, Marcus whispered. Victoria's expression hardened. Time to call in the real help. Outside, Marcus's phone rang. Dad, they're destroying my project right now. I know, son. I've been briefed. Put me on speaker. Victoria listened as the authoritative voice said, This is Michael Chambers. Please escort Marcus back inside. Tell security to call this number if there's resistance. They re-entered. Security stopped them immediately. Victoria showed the phone number. The guard dialed, and his demeanor transformed instantly. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. They proceeded to Thornton's chambers. Inside, Thornton stood behind his desk, Marcus's damaged project before him. A hammer sat nearby. This is harassment, Thornton began. Your Honor, I have instructions to call this number if you refuse to return the property. Victoria displayed the phone. Some bureaucratic underling doesn't concern me. Then make the call yourself, Marcus suggested. Something in Marcus's calm confidence made Thornton pause. He dialed reluctantly. This is Judge Thornton. Who am I speaking with? His expression shifted from annoyance to shock to terror. Yes, I understand. But the device was... Pause. Yes, sir. He handed back the phone, hand shaking. Your property will be returned immediately, Mr. Chambers. In its original condition, with all data intact. Thornton nodded, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. As they gathered the equipment, Marcus's phone rang again. Is it resolved, son? His father asked. Yes, Dad, thank you. Good. Would you put Judge Thornton on the line? I'm coming tomorrow to meet with him personally. Victoria stared at Marcus. Your father is... Marcus nodded as Thornton approached, looking ashen. The judge took the phone. From it came a clear voice. Judge Thornton, this is United States Attorney General Michael Chambers. I'll be in your courthouse tomorrow at 9 to discuss your treatment of my son and the apparent pattern of judicial misconduct in your courtroom. Clear your docket. Thornton nearly collapsed. Yes, Mr. Attorney General. In the hallway, Victoria let out a low whistle. Your father is the Attorney General. Appointed 18 months ago. We keep it quiet. She examined the damaged project. This is really about air quality monitoring? Yes. 8 months of data showing environmental laws aren't enforced equally. Marcus touched the cracked components. The high pollution areas match exactly with Judge Thornton's harshest sentencing patterns. You found evidence of environmental racism connected to judicial bias without even realizing it. I just wanted to help my neighborhood breathe cleaner air. I never expected to expose a corrupt judge. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Dawn broke over Richmond the next morning with an explosion of news vans surrounding the federal courthouse. Word had leaked that the Attorney General was making an unscheduled visit, and speculation ran wild about the reason. Inside his chambers, Judge Gerald Thornton paced furiously, phone pressed to his ear. Senator, you promised protection. You said nothing could touch me as long as I kept ruling in favor of your interests. The voice on the other end murmured something Marcus would never hear. I understand politics, but this is my career. This is my life. If he digs deep, enough? More murmuring. Yes, I understand. I'll handle it. He slammed the phone down just as his clerk entered, pale-faced. Sir, there are FBI agents in the lobby. FBI. Thornton's stomach dropped. The Attorney General wasn't just coming to talk. He was coming with investigators. Meanwhile, Marcus and his father arrived at a private courthouse entrance, away from the media circus at the front. Michael Chambers was tall and distinguished, with the same steady composure his son had inherited. FBI agents flanked them as they walked through the corridors. You okay? Michael asked quietly. Better now. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You stood your ground respectfully. You documented everything. You didn't let them intimidate you into giving up. Michael squeezed his son's shoulder. I couldn't be more proud. But this isn't just about your project anymore. They entered a conference room where Victoria Chen waited, with several Justice Department officials. Maps of Richmond covered one wall, certain neighborhoods highlighted in red and orange. Ms. Chen has been invaluable, one of the officials explained to Michael. She's compiled substantial evidence of Judge Thornton's pattern of discriminatory rulings over the past decade. Victoria stepped forward. It correlates directly with Marcus's air quality research. The neighborhoods with the worst environmental protections, the ones where violations are reported but never enforced, they match exactly with where Judge Thornton's rulings have been most severe against minority defendants. Michael studied the maps, his expression hardening. And these correlate with Senator Whitmore's investment interests. Another official confirmed. The senator's shell companies have been buying property in these areas for years, always after environmental regulations were selectively not enforced, driving down property values. Then, after cleanup, efforts are mysteriously redirected elsewhere. The property values rise and his companies sell at enormous profit. Marcus examined his damaged project. That explains why Thornton was so determined to destroy my research. It proves the connection between environmental discrimination and judicial misconduct. My data is the smoking gun. His father nodded gravely. You stumbled onto something much bigger than either of us realized. Your environmental justice project exposed actual injustice, a corruption network that's been operating for years. A knock at the door. Judge Thornton entered, flanked by his own attorney, an expensive-looking man in a tailored suit who clearly hadn't expected to be defending against federal investigators. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Attorney General Chambers? Thornton's voice was strained, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. This theatrical display is hardly necessary for what amounts to a misunderstanding about a school project. Michael didn't offer his hand. This meeting isn't about my son's project, though that incident provided the thread that unraveled a much larger pattern. Please sit. For the next 2 hours, Justice Department officials presented evidence of Thornton's judicial misconduct, discriminatory sentencing patterns, selective enforcement of environmental regulations, suspicious connections to Senator Whitmore's business interests. The charts were damning. In neighborhoods with high minority populations, the same ones Marcus's project showed had catastrophically poor air quality, defendants received sentences averaging 40% longer than identical cases from other areas. Phone records showed calls between Thornton's chambers and Senator Whitmore's office, immediately preceding key environmental rulings that benefited the senator's development companies. This is a political witch hunt, Thornton finally exploded. I've served on this bench for 22 years with distinction. Yes, Michael replied evenly, and we've reviewed 22 years of your rulings. The patterns are undeniable. Thornton's attorney interjected repeatedly. Each objection met with more evidence, more documentation, more data. Finally, something broke in the judge's expression. I want immunity, he said quietly. His attorney stood abruptly. My client is not making any statements at this time. Michael slid a document across the table. Judge Thornton, this is formal notice of investigation by the Justice Department. You are being placed on administrative leave pending its completion. You can't do this. I'm not doing this. Your own actions are. Michael stood. The Judicial Ethics Committee is convening an emergency session this afternoon. I suggest you prepare. As Thornton and his attorney left, Marcus turned to his father. He's going to turn on the senator. When powerful people fall, they rarely fall alone. Thornton knows his career is over. Now he's negotiating the terms of his surrender. This moment right here, when a corrupt judge realized he'd been brought down by the very teenager he'd tried to silence, is one of those moments that reminds us why we tell these stories. Let me know in the comments. Did you see this coming? By evening, news of Thornton's suspension had spread across every network. Marcus watched the coverage with his parents in their living room, the glow of the television casting shadows across their faces. Sources confirmed the investigation began after Judge Thornton attempted to confiscate and destroy scientific evidence collected by a high school student, a reporter announced. That evidence allegedly shows environmental protection laws being selectively enforced in minority neighborhoods. Angela Chambers turned to her husband. How big is this going to get? Very big. Senator Whitmore's development companies have been exploiting these neighborhoods for years, and Thornton wasn't the only judge involved. But why target Marcus's project specifically? Angela asked. Marcus answered before his father could. Because data doesn't lie. My air quality measurements created a map that matched perfectly with the corruption network's activities. I accidentally connected environmental racism with judicial misconduct, gave investigators the evidence they needed to prove what they'd suspected but couldn't demonstrate. His father's phone rang. He answered, listened, then sighed heavily. Senator Whitmore is calling for an investigation into the investigation. Claims it's politically motivated. Is it? Marcus asked. Justice isn't political, son. But those who obstruct it often hide behind politics. This fight isn't over. It's just beginning. The following weeks became a blur of hearings, testimonies, and media. Attention. Marcus found himself at the center of a national conversation about environmental justice, judicial accountability, and the power of data to expose systemic discrimination. Judge Thornton, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of criminal charges, ultimately agreed to cooperate with investigators. His testimony implicated not only Senator Whitmore, but a network of developers, lobbyists, and 3 other judges who had participated in the scheme. The trial was swift. Senator Whitmore attempted to flee the country but was apprehended at a private airfield. His development companies were seized, their assets frozen pending investigation into decades of environmental crimes. 3 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing the National Conference on Environmental Justice. His rebuilt and enhanced air quality monitoring system stood proudly beside him, now professionally manufactured based on his original design. The audience filled every seat in the convention center ballroom. Scientists, activists, government officials, community organizers from across the country. Television cameras lined the back of the room, broadcasting his words to millions. Environmental justice isn't abstract, Marcus told them. It's about who gets to breathe clean air, who has access to safe water, whose children play in soil contaminated with industrial waste, while other children in other neighborhoods play in pristine parks. He advanced his presentation slides showing before and after maps of Richmond. 3 months ago, these red zones had particulate matter levels exceeding federal safety standards by 300%. Today, with proper enforcement finally happening, those levels have dropped by 70%. Applause rippled through the audience. But the real change isn't in the numbers. It's in the people. The grandmother in Riverside Heights who can finally sit on her porch without her asthma inhaler. The kids in Southside who can play outside without developing respiratory infections. The families who no longer have to choose between their health and their homes. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Some people told me to know my place. They tried to destroy my research, silence my voice, make me disappear from the conversation. But here's what I've learned. Your place is wherever you choose to make your stand. Nobody gets to tell you where you belong, except you. After his presentation, Marcus joined a panel discussion with environmental scientists, legal experts, and government officials. The conversation ranged from policy implementation to community engagement to the challenges of sustaining reform. The Chambers case, as we now call it, has transformed our approach, the EPA director explained. We've launched similar citizen monitoring programs in 40 cities nationwide. The data is revealing similar patterns of selective enforcement across the country. A Justice Department representative added, following Senator Whitmore's indictment, we've opened investigations into similar arrangements in 14 other states. Judge Thornton's testimony has been invaluable in exposing the network. Marcus listened, still processing how his garage science project had catalyzed such sweeping changes. During a break in the proceedings, someone asked about judicial reform. The Administrative Office of U.S. Courts has implemented new transparency requirements, explained the Judicial Ethics Committee chair. All environmental rulings must now include detailed reasoning and are subject to statistical review for potential bias patterns. Judges can no longer hide discriminatory practices behind judicial discretion. After the conference, Marcus and his father walked through the National Mall as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The Washington Monument stood silhouetted against the fading light, and the sounds of the city hummed softly around them. Senator Whitmore's development company is paying for environmental remediation in all affected neighborhoods, Michael told him. The settlement includes funding for community health clinics specializing in respiratory conditions. And there's more. They're establishing scholarship funds for students from those neighborhoods who want to study environmental science. Marcus watched a group of children playing nearby, their laughter carrying across the grass. Will it last, though? These changes? That depends on people like you. Systems only change when someone challenges them. Michael paused, looking at his son with obvious pride. You've been offered a full scholarship to study environmental science and law, haven't you? Marcus nodded. They want me to expand my monitoring system statewide, turn what I did in Richmond into a model for community-driven environmental oversight. From science project to state policy. Not bad for someone who just wanted to help his neighbors breathe. I never expected any of this, Dad. I just saw a problem and tried to measure it. That's how real change usually happens. Michael put his arm around his son's shoulders. Someone sees injustice and refuses to accept it. Someone gathers evidence when everyone else looks away. Someone stands their ground when they're told to know their place. A news alert buzzed on Marcus's phone. He glanced at the notification. 3 more judges in different states had been placed on administrative leave pending investigations. It's spreading, he observed. Michael nodded. What you uncovered wasn't isolated. It was systemic. Sometimes all it takes is one crack in the foundation to reveal that the whole structure is compromised. And one person standing their ground, Marcus added. Exactly. 1 year later, Marcus walked through his old neighborhood in inner Richmond, now transformed. New trees lined streets that had once been barren. Air quality monitors based on his design stood at key intersections throughout the city, their data publicly accessible through a smartphone app he'd helped develop. Children rode bicycles down sidewalks that had been cracked and neglected for decades, now repaved with funds from the Whitmore settlement. Community gardens flourished in lots that had once been illegal dumping sites. The air itself seemed cleaner, lighter. He stopped outside the federal courthouse where everything had begun. The building looked the same imposing marble facade, same American flag hanging beside the entrance, but so much had changed within its walls. A new plaque announced the Environmental Justice Review Board established in the wake of the Thornton-Whitmore scandal. Below it, smaller text explained the board's mission. Ensuring equal protection under environmental law for all communities. Marcus entered through security without incident. The guard nodded respectfully as he passed, recognizing him from the news coverage that had made his face famous. Good to see you, Mr. Chambers, the guard said. We've come a long way. We have, Marcus agreed. But there's still more work to do. In the main hall, a community exhibition showcased environmental data from across the city. School children gathered around interactive displays showing air quality improvements over time, the same kind of data Marcus had once collected alone in his garage. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, that's him! That's the boy from the news! Marcus knelt down to her level. Are you interested in science? She nodded shyly. I want to help people too, like you did. Then never let anyone tell you that you can't. You hear me? Never. Victoria Chen met him near a display featuring his original project, carefully restored and preserved as a symbol of how change begins. "The touring exhibition opens in Atlanta next month," she told him. "Your story has inspired similar citizen monitoring projects in 52 cities now. Environmental justice organizations across the country are using your methodology." "How's the judicial reform progressing?" Marcus asked. 18 judges have been reviewed for similar discriminatory patterns. 6 have resigned rather than face investigation. Victoria smiled. "And Judge Thornton's community service?" "Ironically, part of his plea agreement includes working in the very neighborhoods his rulings once harmed. I heard he's been doing outreach at the community center on Parkside Avenue, teaching kids about their legal rights. Strange how things work out. Justice has a sense of irony sometimes." They walked together to a conference room where his father waited with several Justice Department officials and community leaders from across Richmond. Maps on the walls showed dramatic improvements in environmental compliance throughout previously neglected neighborhoods. "The data doesn't lie," a health department official reported. "Childhood asthma hospitalizations are down 38% in the affected communities. Adult respiratory conditions showing similar improvements. Life expectancy projections are actually rising for the first time in decades." Michael embraced his son with obvious pride. Marcus's monitoring system has been adopted as the national standard for community air quality assessment. Marcus shook his head, still amazed by the impact of his work. It was never really about the technology. It was about asking a simple question: who deserves protection under the law? A community leader stood, an elderly woman from Riverside Heights, who had testified at the Thornton hearings about her family's generations-long struggle with pollution-related illness. "We knew the air was making our children sick," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We knew something was wrong. We filed complaints for 30 years. But without data, without proof, our complaints were dismissed. Our voices didn't matter until this young man gave us evidence. He gave us power." "Sometimes justice needs evidence," Michael agreed. "But it also needs people willing to stand their ground when those in power tell them to know their place." After the meeting, Marcus and his father walked through the neighborhood where everything had started. Children played in a new park built where an illegal dumping site had once poisoned the soil. Elderly residents sat on porches, breathing cleaner air than they'd known in decades. "Senator Whitmore's sentencing is next week," Michael mentioned. "His development company has been ordered to fund environmental remediation for the next 20 years. And he's facing 15 to 20 years himself." Marcus watched a group of high school students installing a new air monitor at a nearby intersection. Volunteers continuing the work he'd started. "That's how lasting change works," Michael said. "It outlives its creators." They stopped at Marcus's old high school, where a banner announced a new environmental science academy established in his honor. Through the windows, they could see students clustered around monitoring stations, analyzing data, preparing reports for community action. "You know what Judge Thornton told me during his community service?" Michael asked. Marcus shook his head. "He said he never believed one person could change a system, especially not someone young, someone whose society had already decided didn't belong in certain spaces, someone the world had already written off before they even had a chance to prove themselves." Michael paused, a slight smile crossing his face. "He said you proved him wrong about everything, about what young people can accomplish, about what data and determination can achieve, about what happens when someone refuses to accept injustice as inevitable." "It wasn't just me," Marcus replied. "It was everyone who spoke up once the first domino fell. The witnesses who testified, the journalists who investigated, the community members who finally had data to support what they'd always known. Victoria Chen, Dr. Williams, Uncle James, you." As sunset bathed the neighborhood in golden light, Marcus looked at how far they'd all come. The clean air, the new trees, the children playing freely. All of it born from one teenager's refusal to accept that some people's health mattered less than others. All of it born from standing his ground when every instinct might have said to back down. The system only works when everyone has equal protection under it, Michael said. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the real lesson here. Justice isn't automatic. It isn't guaranteed. It requires vigilance, evidence, and courage. The courage to stand against power when it's being abused. Even when you're scared. Even when you're alone. Even when everyone tells you to give up. His father smiled at the simple truth that had transformed their lives and their community. Your place, he said, is wherever you choose to make your stand. Marcus looked back at the courthouse one more time, remembering the boy who had walked through those doors with a science project and walked out with a mission. That boy had been scared. That boy had been alone. But that boy had refused to be silenced. You know what, Dad? I think I finally understand what that means. Really understand it. Michael put his arm around his son's shoulder as they walked toward home. And that understanding, son, that's what makes all the difference. If you found strength in Marcus's story, if his courage reminded you that one voice really can make a difference, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching until the very end. Stories like these need to be told. Stories of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary injustice, of data defeating discrimination, of young voices refusing to be silenced no matter how powerful the opposition. Hit that like button to help others discover this story. Subscribe to RealTales for more powerful narratives about everyday people fighting systemic injustice. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters, because it truly does. One person, one project, one moment of refusing to back down can change absolutely everything. You've seen what Marcus did. Now the question is, what will you do with what you've witnessed? Leave a comment below and tell me. What part of this story hit you the hardest? What would you have done in Marcus's shoes? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. At RealTales, we believe reflection is good, but action is better. Subscribe, share, speak up, because awareness is only the first step toward real change. And always remember, your place is wherever you choose to make your stand. Nobody gets to tell you where you belong, except you. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time.